All right, well,
Home office
everyone,
today.
yep, full house.
Nice.
Going forward with the Graphic Novel Club, everyone, thanks for joining me tonight. As you know, I'm your host, Adam. I hope you know that by now. And Alicia, Jolie, Mike, I'm glad you can join me for this because I'm really excited speaking about this graphic novel, Giant Days. I've heard about it for a while, but I haven't checked it out until just recently. So I'm very excited to get discussing about this, starting off as an independent-based webcomic and then making the transition over to physical releases via Boom Studios. We're reading the first volume of the collected set of Giant Days, which covers issues 1 through 4. And I just want to go through the group and get everyone's opinion on the graphic novel. Let's start with Jolie. What were your thoughts about Giant Days?
Oh my god, I give this 10. A 10! Where was this comic book when I was in university?
That's 10 out of 50, right?
No. 10 out of 10. 10 out of 10. 10 out of 10. So good. I enjoyed it so much that I immediately borrowed volume 2 and have been reading it, so. Did no one else enjoy this book? Am I just like...
Well, it's your turn to speak. We're just letting you,
okay.
Have your say. That's all.
That's cool. Okay, cool. And then my favorite part about the book was the expressiveness of the art. I don't know if it was mentioned in this book club, but we're talking about how if you draw a face that's static, it's not as if they're talking. But if you draw a face with an open mouth, it's more believable that they're having a conversation. And then you'll never unsee that again. And it's like, if you see dialogue and the mouths aren't moving and it's just a static face with a closed mouth, it's so boring. And that's that is really another, the biggest reason why I'm giving this such high praise is that the art was so expressive. It was so dynamic for an indie book.
Yeah, we should mention the artwork was actually done by Lissa Treiman.
Yes.
She actually did the artwork just for the first 6 issues. So by issue 7, it changed over to, I believe it was Max Sarin. They started doing pretty much for the rest of the series with a few other artists. But I have to say, Lissa Treiman's work is fantastic. She also worked on Minotaur and a few other books, so I do recommend checking that out if you enjoyed this. But yeah, I do agree. I really liked the art style here. I want to talk a little bit about it and how sequential art is used in the graphic novel as we go through the conversation, but I'm really glad to hear you enjoyed it. Even if other people hate it, it'll be great to have that dynamic.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Jolie, seriously. Mike, what about you? How did you feel about the book?
I think this is my least favorite book we've reviewed so far. My only guess is that I'm not really the audience because I didn't like any of the humor. I didn't like. I thought the art was technically okay, but I thought it was trying a little bit too hard. You know what I mean? Like the body language and all that stuff. So I don't know. I guess it just totally missed the mark for me. Like I didn't like the humor. I didn't really like anything. Granted, I read comics for kids pretty much every day, but I thought this was maybe just below my age range. Maybe if I would have read it in high school or something, I would have liked it more, but it just wasn't my cup of tea, So.
Well, based off of what you said, if you had one overarching criticism of maybe the writing, the art, whatever have you, what would be the biggest criticism you would have about the book?
I think it's just, I found the humor, I could see exactly where they were trying to be funny, and I just didn't find it funny. That was my main thing, But if I were to look at the book again, I could find specific examples, but I think that's pretty much it.
Okay, so this is interesting because so far it's a very polarized view. We have 2 ends of the spectrum here. God, we got 2 teams going on. Well, let's see if we can break this. Alicia, what were your thoughts about Giant Days?
So I'm kind of in the middle of Mike and Julie. I loved the art. I loved everything about the art. I loved the humor, but there were some issues that I had with it that I felt were. I was really hoping for this to just be like Julie was saying, like, where was this when I was in university, right? I was really hoping for this to be kind of like really making me nostalgic for my university days, but it did not, and it felt a little bit like what a high schooler thinks goes on in university. But then I was thinking about it a little bit, and I was like, well, they're first year university, so I'd really like to read the next couple volumes and see if the storyline matures with the characters as they go on through university. Because, yeah, okay, first year university, yeah, you are mainly concerned with boys because it's first year university, boys and partying, right? You're practicing this newfound freedom. So I don't know, like, yeah, I was a little bit disappointed with the subject matter. There were some things that I felt could have been explained a little bit better. You mentioned that it was a webcomic before it was a book, physical book, which makes a lot of sense because there's some stuff that it's like, wait a minute, where did this come from? Like, hold on, let me get Susan. You know how Susan has that guy from her past? I can't remember the guy's name. So she wrote that piece about him being a misogynist, and then all of a sudden he built these things and this art installation, and everyone's like, oh, okay, I guess he's okay. And it's like, you didn't mention the art installation before now. So I felt like there was some continuity issues with the story, I felt. But aside from that, I really did like the humor, and I really did like, there was that moment that I posted on Facebook where one of the characters, is it Ed? Ed is running up to Susan, and he's like, your laptop screen is disgusting. Do you just sneeze right onto the screen? And she's like, I give it a bath on its birthdays. And I was like, oh man, when was the last time I washed my computer screen? Yeah, so I did really enjoy it. And I did feel like some of it was relevant to the subject matter, the university, first year university. But I did also feel like it was a little too boy-centric and party-centric. Yeah.
So obviously, Julie, high praise for this. Mike, a lot more critical. So since you're a little, let's say, on the ambivalent side about this, what would have been the biggest criticism that you had about this comic?
For me?
Who me?
Yeah.
Oh. What happened? Did I lose you guys?
I'm hearing, Alicia, if you're talking, I think we might just be having a problem. 1 second.
Oh, no, I wasn't talking. Were you asking me that, Adam, the question?
Okay, now we're back. Yeah, I was asking you. I know you talked a little bit about it already, but I'm just wondering if you had one particular major criticism about the book, what would it be?
So my biggest complaint, and I feel like the book touches on this even too, and this is why I think this is my biggest complaint about the book, is it kind of doesn't pass the Bechdel test. And they even had a little joke about it early on in the book, like, we're totally failing the Bechdel test right now. And as I was reading the book, I was acutely aware of that. And it's like, if you're going to mention this, maybe it's something that you want to make sure that you pass it at some point. And then when I realized that this graphic novel was written by a man about these women in university, I was like, I don't know. It kind of got rid of that suspension of disbelief for me. I just kind of was like really critical about the way the girls were portrayed, the way their relationships with each other were portrayed, the way their relationships with other characters were portrayed. That's my biggest complaint personally. Yeah.
Okay. So I asked you that because I did hear a lot of praise that you gave for the artwork and for the humor. I'm assuming those were the elements you liked most about it.
Yes.
And now that we've laid out some of those criticisms you have that Mike have, I want to delve into it because I think this book is very interesting, at least to study, for seeing what happens when a book goes from a webcomic format to a serialized individual issue format, which is what happened here. I guess we should start this part of the conversation by just asking everyone, have you read webcomics in the past? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So feel free to chime in, whoever wants to start, but how would you define a webcomic compared to a standard issue-based comic? Jolie.
In the start of the book, or like, the introduction, they talked about it, or maybe it was in that interview that you had sent the link around. They address it in like TLDR. This is the best adaptation of a webcomic, like a collection. It's almost as if he wrote it knowing that he would eventually collect it as issues or as a graphic novel, because it felt like it was conscious of it. I knowing that it was a webcomic before we went into it, I think because you had mentioned it, I read it the way that I would read a webcomic. So it's like, I'm not sure how many pages he released. I'm assuming just 1 page a day was how much he released. So I kind of read it in that way, and it works as, I'm surprised at how well this works as in that sort of webcomic format. And in a graphic novel, like a collected format. It's very well considered, though that may address some of the issues with continuity. Like suddenly McGraw has an art installation, that mother and son art installation, one that was scarily accurate. Adam, I think you were there with me at art school. So much forgiveness for men if they were able to produce gigantic, practically earthworks. So it's like all misogyny is forgotten. It's erased when you're an art star of that caliber. So that really kind of, that was triggering. And then, but again, I think the format addresses Alicia's concern with the continuity, that they're in reading it as a webcomic, something like that would have been like glossed over. It wouldn't have been something that they dwelled on with his character.
No, and I can see that for sure. With that said, I'm curious, Mike, I know you read a lot of single issues, a lot of graphic novels. You've read some webcomics. What would you say stylistically in terms of how information is presented? What's the biggest difference that you see between webcomics and standard single issues?
It's hard to pin down, but I think it's more like, I think webcomics have affected all comics now, because I read paper comics digitally, and I read digital comics in paper form, right? And so I think they're influencing each other. And I noticed that page design is a huge thing, right? Because obviously these digital comics are designed to be read panel by panel, I assume. Also, I noticed, because when I was reading this, honestly, I wasn't thinking about whether it was a digital comic or not, but I did notice sometimes that there was a weird feeling of like the pacing of like where things began and where they ended, and I wasn't sure. Not like afterward, I read up on it and realized it was a digital comic, and that made it make more sense. But it's kind of hard to explain. But it's almost like sometimes they're straddling the line a little bit, and they're not really going one way or another. Because, for example, comic strips like Peanuts, because we used to get 2 or 3 different papers at my house, the Windsor Star and the Detroit Free Press, and I know that one of them had only, say, the 2, oh my God, help me out, the panels, like the rows of panels.
Yeah, like the panels and the 2 strips, right?
Yeah, but then if you'd get like the Detroit Free Press, there'd be that extra tier at the top with a giant logo and maybe 1 extra panel to introduce the story. And sometimes when I was reading this, it felt like, oh, they just put that in there just to fill up this page, or just a little. But again, I'm trying to find moments, and it's hard to. But it did feel that way sometimes. But it's almost like because the whole medium is in between mediums right now, and they're not sure exactly which way to commit, and that's what I felt like with this comic. Whereas if, for example, if it was like the Spirit, and they're 100% committed to the page, they would make all the panels all wrap around each other and, be a little bit more experimental, I think, and more confident, I think, with the way that they're telling the story.
Okay, no, I think those are valid points to make. Alicia, like you said, you've read some web comics compared to the graphic novels or single issues you've read as well. Like, what would you define being the major differences between the two mediums?
So the webcomics that I read them through what's the app? Webtoon, I think. Yeah, Webtoon. So Webtoon is formatted specifically for reading on a cell phone. So I'm gonna pull up a web comic that I follow. Sorry, it's just taking a hot minute. And so kind of like what Mike was saying, it is very much like a panel by panel. Oh dear, you can't see that. It is very much a panel by panel thing. But the webcomic that I read, it does also bleed across the panels. So it takes advantage, the artist specifically who I'm thinking of, really takes advantage of the format with the cell phone. So you can see, or maybe you can't, there's a speech bubble there. And then we get the panels will stretch across, they'll stretch longer. It's really well done. So for me, it's more the formatting. A lot of the webcomics that I read, there's not this continuity issue that I encountered in this one. So I really feel that even though it's a webcomic, I really feel that the continuity issue that's not a good enough excuse for it, in my personal opinion, especially too if you're going to be making it into a physical book. Obviously, so one of the webcomics that I read is it's being published in a physical book. And I'm really interested to see how they're going to translate that long, thin format of the cell phone screen into an actual paperback book. Because obviously they can't do one frame per page. That would be, this book would cost a lot of money and be massive. So yeah, for me, it's more the format of it and less the story. This one, Giant Days, I did notice that there was kind of like a punchline at the end of each page. So I did get the feeling that he probably published it one page a week or one page a month. I'm not sure. So that's another thing that I think is standard of the format. But I really feel that it shouldn't influence the continuity, in my opinion.
So with all that said, I have to say you all hit on really good points, because I feel personally the difference between a webcomic and maybe what Mike was indicating, a daily or a weekly comic strip you get in the newspaper, is that that's your time frame you're working with. You have to have your punchline or your story arc concentrated to a series of small panels or a comic strip. Whereas a single issue, of course, you have a lot more room to breathe, and you want to make sure there's continuity, just not on the individual pages, but going throughout the issue. I feel assembling something together from webcomics, whether they were strips or individual pages, in this case it was individual pages, there's a sense of loss in terms of that continuity. And we always talk about how comics and graphic novels are sequential art. You're meant to understand meaning based off of the sequence you're reading. That does get a little bit disruptive when you make these transitions, I feel. I did note, as the book went on to later issues, that I think what you were indicating, Alicia, started leaving a bit, that it became less an issue, that at the end of each page there's a punchline, and it became more about actually developing character and setting up storylines throughout the rest of the book, specifically in issue 4. Now that's my opinion, but I can see Mike kind of hemming and hawing. I don't know if that means it's made it better, but I think it did change the approach that they were writing the comic with.
No. I'm still trying to find examples of what I meant, and I realize I have no examples. That's all. But I am, as you're saying that, I'm looking like for stuff. So
Okay. What I do want to bring up, though, is the fact there is a lot about the interpersonal relationships happening here with this main trio of girls. We have Esther, Susan, and Daisy. And then, of course, we have Graham, who is that figure that has that uh, tumultuous, almost, how should we say, frenemy relationship with Susan. And then Ed, who is just kind of like the de facto milquetoast guy who hangs around them. Of course, he has a crush on the goth girl because you know you have to fulfill every like trope and stereotype you can. Um, you know, I want to hear your opinions about their characters in terms of how developed were they? Did you like them? And if you didn't, what was it about how the characters were presented that created a challenge for you enjoying them? Jolie, go ahead.
Oh, you can see my mouth moving ahead of my thoughts coming out. At first when it's like they're introduced in sort of like an overhead shot sort of splash page, and when it was like this is this person, this is this person, this is this person, I rolled my eyes. And I was like, oh, good. This is going to be terrible. Because here you have the neurotic lesbian redhead who's skinny, and maybe a lesbian, who knows. Wait, am I mixing this up with a TV show I'm watching?
Is it on the CW?
No, it's actually on HBO. I've been watching Mare of Easttown. I was like, wait, that's the wrong character. No. Yeah, that's right. Okay. And then you have the goth, obviously. And then you have like the normal, rational one. And everybody who I know who's had like who creates a webcomic based on characters of people that they know because they're so interesting, or they've been told that their friends are so interesting, creates those three characters first. And I was like, okay, well, that's fine. And they turned out to be kind of like sweet, um, in a Scott Pilgrim kind of way. It was like, to me, I compared, they weren't as fleshed out or as funny, but they definitely weren't annoying. I didn't find them as annoying as I thought that they would be. Um, they're, the dialogue, I rolled my eyes at like, this stuff is just like pulp. This is like, to me, this is like a guilty pleasure comic, and I'll continue to read it. The way that some people look at books like Saga and like Sex Criminals and those books to be like, or like The Wicked and the Divine. Like, I'll give this one a fun nickname, and I'll create like my own merch around Giant Days because now I'm a big fangirl for this. Like, I'm gonna join this fandom. But back to the characters, they weren't as funny or fleshed out as maybe the author perceived them to be, but I feel like that's just it. I don't want to say like an amateur move. That's the wrong word. Those are the wrong words, because this author had written some other things that were highly praised before. I will say, though, that maybe some of the things that were a little bit embarrassing about the dialogue or about the characters might be because he is a male writing female characters. There were several times when I was like, no, a group of girls wouldn't do that. No, we wouldn't. Like, a group of guys might do that, but a group of girls definitely would not do that.
Are there any examples you can think of?
Yeah, jump over the gender divide. Let us know. Me and Mike, we need research.
Sorry, my phone died. The revenge scene. I feel like I see this revenge scene in a lot of CW shows now that you bring it up. But would they go into the law class to watch their revenge play out on the three boys who create the website.
Oh, yes.
To me, it's a scene that's written for a lot of like. There's like another show or movie that I've seen, like what was it? The Harry Bird was one of the movies where something like this happens, and it's like, no, girl, I don't think girls would do that. Like, I've never. Girls are petty, but they're not like that level of petty. You know what I mean? That's just one example.
I even want to take your example there a step further, Jolie, too, because yeah, like here's Esther, like I'm being included on this gross website and I'm being targeted in this way. And so what, does she go to the dean? I'm looking at the page, it's digital page 62. So she goes to, we'll call him the dean, I'm not too sure, with her complaint. And he just kind of fluffs her off and tells her to just kind of, like, I suggest that you fax them or whatever it is and ask them to take you off the list. Like, it's just such a cop-out. Yeah. It's almost like it almost would have been worse if he had said boys will be boys, right? But this is a very real thing that I, as a woman, have dealt with in my work, in the working world, in my school life. Like, I have dealt with this so many times. And so then they go and say, well, we're going to plan revenge. And it's like Jolie, it's like, no, in the real world, women wouldn't do that. Like, there's no planning revenge. There's no way to get back at these guys. There's just dealing with the fallout from it and hoping that it blows over. And so when I saw this page, digital page 62, when Esther is confronting the dean about this behavior and gets fluffed off, I was like, wow, this is real. And then you turn the page and they're like, okay, we're gonna get revenge. And it's like, I was immediately disappointed because I was looking forward to seeing my experiences play across the page. And instead what ends up happening is like, it's pure fantasy. You know,
Yeah.
Sometimes fantasy is nice, but this feels more slice of life. And I was hoping that it would continue to be slice of life in that sense.
Yeah, do you know what I forgot too is that they're British.
Mm-hmm.
Just really quickly, I forgot that they're British, but just flipping through it, like maybe it's a cultural thing. Maybe a group of British girls might do it, but
Maybe.
I know as a North American woman, I would never have done anything like that. Let's see what else.
As homegrown Canadian girls, hey, Jolie.
Yeah, we're just too polite to be that petty. Like
Well, that's
we're
what it is, because you're too busy saying sorry. That's the problem.
Ah, damn.
absolutely. Yeah.
You know what? Actually, Jolie, while you look up another example, I want to hear from Mike. Because, Mike, I know you were very critical from the book, from your opening statements. I want to hear your take on the characters.
Well, I mean, yeah, I don't know. How do I explain it? Like, I just didn't think they were. I think the issues that Alicia brought up about, like, kind of jumping from slice of life to fantasy is kind of like what this is, where I wasn't sure if it was trying to be realistic or not. And so that's why I felt like it's almost like on a sitcom when they overwrite the comebacks. That's what it felt like in this. Like, everything was a little bit too overwritten. Like, they were a little bit too clever with their comebacks and a little bit too on the nose. Actually, even this scene that Alicia brought up, like the response from the dean when he's like, I suggest that you fax them or whatever. I mean, I get the point of the joke, but it's so over the top that it becomes farcical. So that's why I think it misses the mark, because it's a little bit too on the nose. Not even on the nose. Characters were like that, and they were exaggerated just a little bit too much in the wrong, And so I don't know. That's why I didn't really like the characters either. Like, not to say that I didn't hate anything. I didn't hate the characters. I didn't hate the dialogue. But to me, on every level, it just missed the mark. And when I did read them use the word sodding, I was like, this better be a freaking British comic, because if that's an American writer using that word, I'm going to flip my computer over. And thank God it was a British writer, so they can get away with that. you know.
Yeah.
But yeah. So that's I don't know. So that's pretty much what I mean about the characters. Like they were a
Mhm.
little bit too, yeah. Like I think you said stereotypical earlier. That's what I felt about them.
Yeah, I will say we have three main characters that we're following. Susan is the rational tomboy. We have Esther, who's kind of like the flighty, free-going goth girl who's cool but sarcastic. And then we also have Daisy, who is the tall, nerdy student, and they all fill the beats you expect them to.
Mhm.
When I was reading this, of all things, it reminded me a little bit of Community, if anyone had seen that TV show.
Yeah.
Okay, so very similar concept, only the Community takes place in a community college in America, and you have this ragtag group of people who get together in a study group, and it's a very funny series. But what is unique about that series is that there's actual character development.
Yes.
And while all the characters start out representing one type of character trope, you have the nerdy one, you have the jock, you have the ditzy one, they end up being fleshed out and you get more senses of characterization from them.
Mm-hmm.
Throughout, then granted, this might be kind of hard to determine because this is one volume, 4 issues. Did you get a feeling at all that these characters had a chance to grow or develop?
Without being on the page, to me, oh no, I was about to say that Graham developed, but not really. But we definitely learn more about him because of the amount of complaining this season does about him. It's almost like, and just like the little tiny things, like the nuanced behavior of this character. Like, his friend has a key that sticks, and he takes like graphite and rubs it on there. He's just like an everyman. Instead of being part of the food fight fray and getting upset when the gravy hits him in the head, he takes out his comb and uses it as hair gel. Like he's just literally too cool for school. And it drives Susan like up the wall. Yeah. He's the character. His character is the character to me that seemed to change the most. I wonder if the author is the male characters. If like he's identifying with the two male characters.
So, okay, I'm going to take a stretch here.
Sure.
He's probably identifying or placing himself in there as Ed, but wishes he was Graham.
Yeah.
Which you often see for male authors who have these sort of polarizing two male characters, one being neurotic and nerdy, the other one being kind of erudite and capable of things.
Yeah.
And tall with a mustache, of course, right? I mean,
right,
he's basically
just
Tom Selleck.
Wearing a freaking pea coat, like emulating Klaus Oldenburg, like give me a break. Who is this? Like,
it's obviously Benedict Cumberbatch's Doctor Strange.
Yeah, but with the Whedon cuts mustache.
Could we even make a case for Graham's character changing, especially in this first volume? Could we say that his character changes so much because the author is just using him for what he needs him for and is just making him, like clay, right?
Yeah.
So could that even be a reason for the character growth? And I'm using air quotes around growth in Graham, because Graham's just kind of the lump of clay.
I would agree with that. That sounds tight.
Yeah,
because if you look at the other characters, even though the action is primarily focused on the three of them, nothing that happens to them changes them. They continue on, like, and this the one big one. I just want to make sure that it happens in this comic, because it may just happen. No, it happens in volume 2.
Oh,
but
give me one second.
I don't feel like everyone's. Oh, is Adam going to go get it? Oh, no, maybe something's happening at home. Let's see.
Maybe he'll come back with the cat.
Oh, yeah, maybe.
Sorry, I had to let a cat out of the room.
Yeah, yeah, we guessed right. Alicia guessed right. The cat got trapped. Okay, so as long as no one minds that I spoil volume 2 for them.
Spoiler warning.
I don't know, because I do kind of want to read the next volume, and I didn't read it for this club meeting because I didn't want to confuse the volumes during the meeting, like last time that happened.
Oh, okay. The bulk of the character, what should be character changing moments, happens in the second volume. Mm-hmm. And you would think that that would change them as people, because it usually does, but it doesn't. This, okay, let's use, is it Daisy, the skinny redhead? Mm-hmm. Let's just take her character for example. We're not told what her sexual preferences are. She hasn't figured that out for herself either, but we see or we witness her doing a lot of that, trying to figure it out and like navigate it with drugs and friendship, and nothing changes after that with her character. She just goes back to being this sort of like confused self-searcher who maybe she hates herself. Her character doesn't change after that, and that drives me nuts. And maybe potentially it's because the author doesn't know how something that crazy, her grand visits. I have had this happen to me in first year. I went out on a bender and my mother drove 3 hours to surprise me with my sister, and they were upset that I smelled like booze. Granted, it was the next day, but do you know what? Something like that changes you. This did nothing to somebody like Daisy. I became a different person after that experience. I was so I felt so much shame.
And, you bring up a really good point, because I think each one of these characters in this very first volume have events that occur that should change them. We have Susan, who kind of comes to this understanding with Graham, although the dynamic of their relationship doesn't really seem to change too much. And it won't for a bit, just for everyone. Slight spoilers, not really, but it won't. Susan remains the same. Graham basically remains the same. After that whole thing where we have Esther's photo going on that website of all these frat boys that are basically saying these are the hottest girls in the school, nothing changes. Mm-hmm. She doesn't really change at all. Same thing with what's going on with Daisy. She starts getting attracted to this girl. She takes some drugs. She attempts to hit on her. Nothing comes of it. Nothing happens with her either. And even though there was a lot of praise given to this comic and its run, a big part of Daisy's arc is her coming to terms with her sexuality, which I think is really cool because we don't have enough of that in mainstream comics. I think there does need to be a greater emphasis on that, but there's no indication that she's really questioning or wondering. I do say that she seems to be the most reflective and introspective of all the characters, but again, by the end of this volume, I don't really have a sense of progression. It's more episodic. Things happen to these characters, and by the end of the issue, nothing really changes. It's kind of like watching a 90s sitcom in that way.
Simpsons.
Yeah. It's like the Fresh Prince of University, I guess. Yeah.
But I'm Jazz. Just constantly being thrown out.
Yeah, Jazzy Jeff, right?
Yeah.
Only in this case, it's Graham. He just keeps getting, put into misandrous screeds, apparently.
Do you know what? We do see changes again, and this might be just because of the male perspective, is that the one person who does change a lot after being made famous by her feminist zine is Graham. He loses his cool and is like, becomes paranoid. But no one else changes.
Although I don't want to say debate this, but I will ask, was it a change or was it something necessary for that story arc that was resolved at the end? Because did that really change his perspective ongoing or just for the sake of a joke or for a scene?
Yeah, I think it was just, again, I think they're just using him like a little cardboard cutout or a doll to just do what they need him to do to advance the story, and then that's it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like he acts the way we wish we would all act if that happened to us. Like if the tables were turned, we get a little paranoid and we freak out initially, but otherwise we go and we make a gigantic cool piece of art and are cool. Like just happy as a clam. Like it slides off our back. We're in the pharmacy buying feminine products for our girlfriends. Like we're just so cool. It doesn't, nothing, we're unfazed.
Mm-hmm.
This man is ridiculous. Like,
you know, the way you describe it, I kind of wish the entire series was about Graham.
right? The moment he showed up with that mustache, I was like, yeah, me too. He should have just written this about himself, Ed, and then like the girls could have been occasional characters that came in and out, because that's what it seems as though that's kind of how it seems.
So you would have wanted this to be self-insert friend fiction.
Maybe, yeah.
Oh no, that's the worst. I can't stand. I've read so many books by men where it's just them and they're surrounded by the hottest women who are all tropes, and all of them want the man. All of them want him, and it's like, no, I'm so tired of reading that.
Yeah. Well,
so, you know, it's not exactly the same with this one, but there's definitely elements of that here. I'll put that. Okay. Someone who brought this up. Jolie, you brought up Scott Pilgrim before.
yeah.
Okay, because that was another comparison point that came to mind when I was reading this. Quick survey in the group. Who's read Scott Pilgrim?
Me.
Okay. Mike. So obviously you have criticisms of this book, but you like Scott Pilgrim, if I remember correctly. So, okay, my question to you is, what makes Scott Pilgrim work and this not work?
Well, that's a good question. I think Scott Pilgrim is just skilled, Brian Lee O'Malley is a more skilled artist. It's funnier. He is, the impression I got when I read Scott Pilgrim is he is so knowledgeable about all the tools that are used to make a comic, and he uses them so confidently. So he can jump between, and he mixes it all into his own unique style, right? Of manga, video game references, whatever, and like his own unique sense of humor. And I don't know. To me, he's one of the top cartoonists in the field as far as at least humor. And here we have a creator that's maybe imitating him, but is not in even the same league, I don't think,
So go ahead. Sorry.
One thing for me about Scott Pilgrim, Brian Lee O'Malley, I aspire to write dialogue the way Brian Lee O'Malley writes dialogue. Like, it sounds like real people. It's almost like he just sits in a cafe and writes down everything he hears people say in a day, because it is perfect. It's flawless. And you get the sense, like, the characters actually learn and grow. Like, spoiler alert, you follow Scott as he goes through these relationships and then also is trying to get a job, and his roommate kicks him out and he's forced to find a new place to live. Like, there is real growth and change with these characters, and I love Scott Pilgrim.
Mhm. Well, yeah, like I
Yes.
imagine, really quick, I think Brian Lee O'Malley had an arc or everything planned out, and I don't know if this guy does, but that's what I was
Yeah.
going to say.
Yeah, it's less episodic. It didn't debut as a webcomic.
Mhm. I think that's the thing is that this guy did have, is somebody in the backyard?
In my backyard, probably. Sorry, I was on mute.
Oh no, it's okay. No, I keep hearing actual knocking behind me.
Mhm.
But the landscapers were here today. So okay, so Ryan Lee O'Malley, Brad. It's just, yeah, to me, it's more sophisticated. This writer has gone on record to say that they had paid the pages, or at least up to 60 web comics planned in advance.
Mm.
So, and I think this is just another failing of translating one format into another. It's one of the better translations of a webcomic into a single issue into a graphic novel format that I have read, because I've read some disastrous stuff. And
Mhm.
this isn't the worst. It's certainly not the best, but they, just to the point of how well planned was this. Um, the author acknowledges that it was planned up until a certain point. What that looked like, I don't know. I just wanted to say that the author did have plans.
So, because you did enjoy it so much, Jolie, I'm wondering how you would compare this to Scott Pilgrim, whether it's by the humor, writing, art style. Like, what do you think would be a good comparison between the two?
For me, it's the physical comedy, though it's not as well done. There's something that they did in this comic that I've never seen before, which is which I've only seen actually in a Brian Lee O'Malley, but Brian Lee O'Malley uses like typical manga, like sort of emote lines, expression lines. This author or the artist actually uses emoticons. When one character emotes towards another, like she had a skull, like the skull emoji,
Mm.
that was really, I've never seen that before. And I thought they did that a couple times in this book. I thought it was really cool. And that's one of those things that when we all talk about what you can't do in comics, can you do that in,
Right.
um, yeah, do you know what? Who is the director of Scott Pilgrim?
What's his name?
Edgar Wright? Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like Edgar Wright-ish. It's like you see like a a health bar show up beside them. He would be able to adapt that into another medium no one else should even try. So it's like the level of fun to me is the same. The physical comedy, there's like a really good attempt, and it's really funny, like when the mom puts her son in a handbag. That immediately I was like, that's very Scott Pilgrim funny. Like when you see Scott leave the room and she's like, you should cut your hair, and he's like got a hat on his head. That reminded me of that little scene in Scott Pilgrim, but there wasn't
Mhm.
enough of that.
Mhm.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is like Scott Pilgrim and there's 1 is not Scott Pilgrim, this book is like 5,
Okay.
like a 4 or 5. Yeah,
On the Scott Pilgrim level. Yeah.
it's like a baby. It's still getting there. Yeah.
It can't walk on its own, it has to crawl. You have to change its diaper once in a while just in case it soils itself.
They still have to employ food fights in the cafeteria, whatever.
I do
So the
appreciate.
community.
True. I do appreciate how the food fight was initiated by a derby wearing guy who bent over saying "Milady." That I have to admit, I laughed at that.
Uh-huh. That was hilarious. I was like, oh, Britain's got neckbeards too. hmm So good.
You know, when I think about comparing this to Scott Pilgrim, there's a lot going on in Scott Pilgrim itself, where it's a very deceptively simple series, but there's great moments of characterization. The whole thing is about character change, their reluctance to change, and then people eventually finding out what they need to do to meet those changes.
Mm-hmm.
And the challenge with this is that we're reading 4 issues out of a 50-odd issue series. The first volume, maybe it's not the most representative of what's going to happen later on. But I just feel there's no indication really that these characters would change. And something else Mike brought up. You mentioned how in this series there was this sort of shift between very realistic settings and events and then these sort of fantastical events happening, like the intervention where the mothers came in to all the lads who were posting the pictures of girls on the website and they like threw them inside of handbags and accosted them. You know, I'm wondering, I agree that it felt somewhat out of place. And yet Scott Pilgrim blurs that line between fantasy and realistic world building all the time. Why does it work in Scott Pilgrim and why does it not work here? Or I should say, for those who feel it doesn't work, why do you feel it doesn't work here?
I think because Scott Pilgrim keeps the emotion behind it. I think too, the issue, I get distracted. I was looking for the skulls. I think the issue here too is he picks a very, and I'm focusing in on the issue of Esther being featured on that website and then plotting revenge on those boys, men, whatever you want to call them. That's a very real issue that women face. And that is scary. It's terrifying. You know, like they've put her phone number out there. That's terrifying. So I think they take something like that and they kind of fluff it and say, oh, but it's okay because look, they called their mommies on them. And it's like in the real world, that doesn't happen. Where if they had used something like that, I think if they had kept some of the emotion behind it, the frustration and the anger that Esther feels at being used in this way, and maybe even a little bit of the fear of, oh my God, my picture and my name and my phone number are all out there for everyone to find. Like, but they don't. And again, I think that makes it very obvious that it's a man writing women. But two, I think that's where it fails in blurring the lines between fantasy and reality, because in Scott Pilgrim, you do still have the emotion behind it, the frustration, the love, the fear, you know, all of that is still there despite the lines being blurred. Where here, they blur that line and they take a very real issue that happens to women almost daily and they just kind of make light of it. And that's, for me, where it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. You know, I think you put it best. Scott Pilgrim takes these sort of issues that these characters go through and they show real consequences for the characters, for how they have to live their lives afterwards, and this doesn't. I also think Scott Pilgrim's use of fantasy by incorporating video game and comic book elements, those kind of feed into the whole notion of Scott trying to detach himself from adult responsibility, and all the characters likewise doing that. Thematically, I think it makes it a stronger book. Here, it's just used to, I don't know, pay through to a punchline, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with that said, it may sound like I'm attacking this book. I did like it.
Mm-hmm.
I liked it because I found it to be amusing. I liked the jokes, but I'm going to admit a criticism, which is I felt it was pretty superficial, that once you got past the jokes, there wasn't much else. Also, I do like Treiman's art. I have to say her very dynamic style is something I really appreciated. But when you look at character depth, development of storylines, there wasn't really too much to look at after that. So I would say this would be a book I would really suggest people to read if they like these characters. As tropey as they may be, if you end up reading this and you really relate to or enjoy characters like Daisy, Susan, or Esther, then continue on. If you think their interactions are cute and relatively harmless, then yeah, you'll probably enjoy the series. But if you're wanting anything deeper, anything more, this is probably not the series for you to look after. Before we end off the session, our question we always get to, even though we touched upon it, could this have been done in any other format? Did it have to be a comic?
Well, it probably works best as a comic, I think. Because I mean, I think it could be translated to like a film, but it would lose whatever it has, whatever charm it has.
So what about an animated series, though?
Yeah, animated would work. Yeah, but I think like I guess like you mentioned CW earlier. If this was a CW show, would it stand out or would it just blend in with the rest of them? I don't know. Without the artwork,
Yeah, I think it is the artwork that makes this. But I've read so many books, I've watched so many TV series that are so similar to this that I don't think it did anything fantastically different to justify the medium. But that's my personal opinion.
I think that this is one of the best webcomics that I've read. I don't read a lot of webcomics, but of the webcomic suggestions that I've gotten outside of this group, I haven't been impressed by a lot of the material that I have been given to read. And I think I am impressed by this one so much because it straddles the line between what I am accustomed to reading in comics better than the other webcomics have been. So I think the medium it's suited. It's for a 1 page a day format, it does that really well. I went back and read it as if I was reading each plot point as one page, as if that's all I was getting that day. Did this work? Yes. And I will agree that I would watch this as an animated series. I think that they made this. What is that one about the kids in college?
Community.
Well, there's so many. There's undergrads.
That's it,
what?
undergrads.
Yeah.
I was like, this is like undergrads, but
It also reminded me of Clone High a little bit.
yeah. But again, they are like Clone High and undergrads are like an 8 and a 9 on the Scott Pilgrim scale. So yeah. This just needs a little more, like it needs more time. Like this is just the first bit of it. What we witnessed is probably a year, not even a year's worth of comics.
No, because this was coming out semi-regularly at this point. It was a monthly publication. So, I would say I would be willing to go back and read more issues to see if there's development. I just didn't really see the seeds of any real character development or depth here. But, going on to that subject and coming back to would this work in any other format, I'm going to make an argument that a comic format is not the best one for this story. I think an animated series would be, and I'm looking at digital page 47. And this is not saying anything against Lissa Treiman. I love her character design. I love the dynamics she has of her characters. Some of the angles and perspectives she gets are great. But there's a sequence on this digital page 47 where, slight spoilers, I guess. Well, we've all read it, so spoilers for no one. Daisy is sick. So she's like having these over-the-counter cheap drugs to stay awake, and she's being uber productive. And she has like the floor covered in papers that she's writing. And in the fourth panel, she's starting to come down a little bit, and the background is melting.
That's great. I didn't even notice that. That's great.
Yeah, I like that. But then I thought, wouldn't that have been better as an animated sequence where suddenly or slowly the background just starts dripping behind her, cutting to this quick sequence of her just shoving her head out the window, looking up at the bird. Even the next page, the bird starts moving its head around at unnatural angles, talking to her. I can just imagine it like rotating Exorcist style. And I think there's a certain fluidity that Treiman's art communicates where I could tell if it was an animated series, it would do that. And that's a great attribute I want to give to her. I think her art is incredible for that. The issue is, I think it's alluding to how it could be more effective in the animated means. So
I just say though, with that example, if they would have had 6 panels of that same background and then it went from real to like slowly starting to melt, then you would have noticed it, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So again, I mean, they could have done that in a webcomic, but would have taken up a whole page. So it's unlikely they would have done it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's an example. I think a good example of sometimes the limitations of webcomics.
And I do think as it goes on, especially in the 4th issue, you see more instances where it's more, for the lack of a better term, comic book-like. There's a page, let's see, losing my bearings, digital page 86, where Daisy is taken, I think, ecstasy. There's one panel that says soon, and she just is bug-eyed, dancing in the middle of a floor. The panel right beneath it says later, where her flame comes by with water and goes, where the flip are you? And she's just missing. That works. I think the punchline setup delivery for that, it's effective in the comic book format. But is it enough to say it had to be done in this format? I don't know. And I have to say, as much as I love Treiman's work technically and the dynamicness of her characters, it doesn't really do anything that stands out unique in the graphic novel comic medium, at least in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Can
Yes.
we go to digital page 24 and just talk about the bustle scene? Because that was, I think, my favorite gag from the whole book.
That's kind of good. That's good.
Yeah. They're talking for everyone at home, our listeners. Esther's talking about her drama field, and Ed is like, "What do you usually use your drama field for?" She's like, "I don't use it for anything. It's like a Victorian lady's bustle knocking bone china off shelves. It's just there."
Mm-hmm.
And there's a little ghostly image of a Victorian lady knocking stuff off the shelf. I will say, at least that sequence, I'm glad you brought it up, because that is somewhat unique for a comic. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I would love to see an animated episode of that, and Esther's the one in the dress knocking it over with her bustle. I'd love to see that.
I forgot about the drama field. Those are the little elements of fantasy that are very Scott Pilgrim-like, but
Yes.
aren't as sophisticated, say.
Mm-hmm.
Which, again, does not get brought back up.
Yes, I would have liked to have seen more of her drama field, and I want to read more of this series, because and two, now that I know what to expect, I'm not going to expect any more of it, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I'll enjoy it a little bit more going forward. But I do want to see if we do get better character development, if her evil field, or her drama field, sorry, if her drama field makes another return. Yeah.
The girls, they become, it's almost as if they become self-aware of these fantasy elements, because it does get brought up again and they use it for evil.
Oh.
So
it does become an evil field.
Yeah. But I wanted to bring up, and again, I hate to beat us over the head with a big Graham stick, but I want to say again, and I want to stress that he is the only character that develops. And in the scene on Digital 68, where he catches Susan going through the website guys going through their dumpster, he's just naturally walking through town with lumber because, a man like that does not have a carbon footprint. He goes to the lumber yard to get his lumber for his sculpture and walks it home like a proper man should. But anyway, he runs into Susan, who's like, ass over tits in a dumpster. And she, in explaining why she's in the dumpster, he's like, my blood is boiling. Like the idea that they would do that to any woman, he immediately was like, where do they live? I will seek vengeance. And she's like, no, don't do it. Like, he displays more of a change because, again, he doesn't seem, he's like, I'm going to go into that house and beat them senseless. It's like, why didn't the girls think of that first? Like, they hatched this gigantic scheme when they could have just went in there and just fists a-blazing. Which is what I would have done as a woman. How dare you put my friend on the internet and then take donations based on doxing them later. Like, I would have been Graham. So.
And it's interesting that we keep bringing up this particular issue because Janelle Asselim, I believe that's how you pronounce her name, she wrote for Comics Alliance back in 2015 praising this issue's depiction of online shaming. And I will say it depicts it. And, maybe contextually we do have to consider how often do comics, whether of the superhero, drama, memoir, or comic ilk, portray this? Probably not too often. So I think contextually, maybe that's why I got so much praise for at least paying attention to that as an issue. But, paying attention to an issue and making a salient good point about it are two different things, right?
Yeah. It was certainly, I think, what's another, somewhere else that we've seen that unfold, 13 Reasons Why on Netflix. It's like another, again, like, apparently everyone over the age of 15 has a sex tape or has their tits on the internet, has their boobs on the internet, or some part of their like naked body. And it's like, this is like a tamer version of that. Or it's like, what are those other ranking? They used to have a really terrible ranking website. And that's why I think it existed more when like you and I, Adam, were in university. And it's not as cool to do that to somebody now. Like, internet bullying is a big no-no, but I mean, some people still do it, which is shameful. But like things like ranking websites aren't that big a deal, but like, dang, what was that website called?
Are you talking about Rate My Prof?
No, there was one for women.
Oh.
Yeah, much like you in the start of the social network, you know how they're talking about it came about around the advent of Facebook, and I remember a few girls in the dorm being on it, and a lot of them, I think it morphed into that horrifying website where men trash women or women trash men. And they put their photos on there and like they just explain why this person is a garbage person.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about now. Yeah.
Yes, I think the website still exists. It's terrible that people are on it. But like, to me, that's the kind of this is that. It seems sort of antiquated based on the types of cyberbullying that currently occur.
Yeah, whether or not this comic handles it in any profound way, I mean, I will say at least it addresses the issue. It addresses concerns about young people, university-age young people, freshmen, but, as we've stated, I guess my final thought is what my final thought was about 20 minutes ago. It's okay as a piece of art, but as just a fun, mindless read, if you like the humor and it clicks with you, the characters are mainly inoffensive and likable, as much as you can call them characters and just not tropes or stereotypes. It's amusing enough. I would recommend it for people who, I'll put it this way, if you are into humor comics, read the first issue. If you like it, the humor style is going to click with you. Read on for the jokes. Don't read for anything else because I don't think there's that much more to get from it. It's a quick read though, so I would still recommend reading it only to see if it clicks with you. If this is your type of humor, good. If not, at least you have some interesting art to look at. That would be my final view on the comic. Any other thoughts on Giant Days before we wrap up this conversation?
I agree.
Only that I'll agree with Jolie that most of the webcomics that have been recommended to me have not been good.
Okay, I've got a webcomic for you guys because I have one that I'm reading that's really excellent.
Better be good.
It's called Lore Olympus, and it's a modern retelling of the Persephone's Hades myth, as well as some other Greek myths mixed in there. And it's, I don't know, I'm really enjoying it. I love it.
I just, pressure's on, Alicia, of course. I wonder, though, because webcomics are very democratic in the way where you don't have a publisher getting in the way, maybe it's just that there's so many webcomics out there, and anyone can really bring it up as long as you have the time to develop the comic and you have the technology to post it. I mean, it's kind of a free-for-all. So maybe it's just that there's so much stuff out there, it's harder to find the cream of the crop, rather than with publishers. I mean, it's debatable. Certainly we talk about it a lot, but there's quality assurance to one degree or another that comics have to go through.
I will agree with that. And off the record, I don't know if Mike's planning on including this in the finished recording. But as someone who works in publishing and as someone who one of my teachers in publishing school, and I don't blame it on them so that I don't have to be culpable with this. But one of my teachers in publishing school said that when you're going through the unsolicited manuscripts, we call it the slush pile, after a while of reading so many, I don't want to use the word bad.
Just say bad. You could say bad.
Just say crap. Yeah.
After reading so many bad manuscripts, the mediocre ones start to seem good by comparison. So then you almost need a second editor to go through the mediocre ones and find the ones that are great.
Hey,
that's interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
If television's younger has taught us anything, is that there are some gems in the slush pile.
Absolutely. There are gems in the slush pile. They're just very hard to find.
Sorry, I'm just watching so much television during the pandemic. Like everything. I'm watching everything.
What else is there to do right now? Except read comics.
Yeah.
So I want to thank everyone for participating in this conversation. It's interesting too, because we don't really talk about a lot of humor comics. So I'm glad that we could change the pace a little bit and not read something horribly depressing or serious for a change. So our next book is going to be horribly depressing and serious.
Woo!
Woohoo! No, well, I don't know. I'm just curious because this is going to feature writing by industry biggie, Ed Brubaker. So we're going to read something. I'm familiar with his superhero writing, but I'm getting into his independent stuff. We're going to be reading My Heroes Have Always Been Junkies.